and the use of power over individuals. And in this case, it seemed like the governor wanted that authority, those emergency powers at all costs. That became more important to him, it sounds like, than his ability to control or stop COVID.
Never in my life did I envision suing the governor of my state. I mean, that's the last thing I want to do. I just want to run a business and leave me alone. And particularly my industry, which is so heavily regulated, so heavily taxed. Since then, our restaurant is in the heart of downtown Frankfurt, and all the politicians come there frequently, and I've gotten to know folks on both sides of the aisle, great people, and I'll get feedback through the grapevine that the governor still says very disparaging things about me and my business, which is, I want government to kind of let me be and let me run my business.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential. And here's your host, Jeff Crank.
Hey, appreciate you being with us for another episode of American Potential. I'm real excited about this episode because it's pushback on the government. And I kind of like that. As you know, on this show, we discuss government regulations all the time and how they could be barriers for businesses or people. However, what if the business owner or their state representatives were unable to have their voices heard on regulations that affect them due to an emergency declaration that lasted a year? Well, one governor in one of our states was limited in their emergency power authority, but they just ignored it. They sued the General Assembly and they continued to issue orders. Now, because of this, small businesses were caught in the middle and they didn't know which rules and regulations to follow. And they worried about compliance as well as the random enforcement of them. Now, one of those small businesses has a location in the heart of downtown Louisville, Kentucky, just a few blocks away from the Ohio River. Due to the ever-changing orders and legal challenges in the court system, this brewery struggled to operate. Now, because the brewery and other businesses could not effectively operate, they got together and they sued the governor for his use of emergency powers. I love that. So what happened with the case? I want to welcome today's guest, Ted Mitzlaff, who is the owner and CEO of Goodwood Brewing and Spirits. Ted, thanks for being with us. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Okay. Now, first of all, I love this because I always ask Monica to do a fun fact. And the fun fact here says that you were kind of a bootlegger in college. Now, it doesn't say you were a bootlegger. It just says you were kind of a bootlegger. So what does that mean?
Technically, I guess I probably was a bootlegger.
You finally have admitted it, Ted.
That's right. Although it was legal product, just not legal in Virginia. I went to school in Virginia and at the University of Richmond, and they were an ABC controlled state. So
Gotcha.
meaning everything had to go through the
Sure.
state government, and all the liquor stores were owned by the state ABC.
Sure.
And they were extremely strict with IDs, and they closed all their liquor stores at either 5 or 6 p.m.
Yeah.
And as you know, no college kid even thinks about going out before 5 or 6 p.m. or doing anything. So
Right. Sure.
So I figured there was probably a pretty good demand. So when I was home at Thanksgiving as a freshman, and I stopped by a liquor store on my way out of town. I had $2,500 on my credit card available. My parents had given me an emergency credit card, and this seemed like a pretty big emergency. So I bought about $2,000 worth of, believe it or not, WL Weller, which at the time was $16 a bottle, and it was what my father always drank. So it's kind of what I grew up with. And anyway, I took it back to school and doubled the price and sold out in about 2 weeks.
You're very enterprising. This is how you became a businessman, right?
That's right. And I would do it every time I would go home at the holidays. So Generally there was a line out my dorm room when I would arrive back in college.
There you go. So you weren't kind of a bootlegger. You were actually a bootlegger.
I was an underage bootlegger to boot.
The underage bootlegger, and the statute of limitations clearly has run out. So it's
yes, sir. Absolutely.
What a great story. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Okay. And I love your story, by the way, not just the bootlegger one, but the actual story that we're getting to here. You owned a chemical company before Goodwood Brewing. So how did you decide to get into the brewing industry?
Yeah. So I owned a specialty chemical company. My father started, and I took it over. We ramped it up. Did a lot of food processing, cleaning and sanitation, and water treatment. So included in that were breweries. So breweries and distilleries were good targets for us. And there was a little brewery in Louisville that it was really small. There was a little production brewery, and I knew they were in trouble because they couldn't pay for their chemicals to clean the equipment or their boiler treatment. And 5 of us bought the company in 2005 for less than the equipment was worth. And I think we paid like $250,000 for it. And we were ramping it up. And then one of our managing partner was taking some extreme liberties with his expenses. So we voted him off the island. And the guys asked me if I'd run it. And that was 2013. And then I rebranded the company in 2015 with the marketing company in Louisville, Doe Anderson. They do all the Maker's Mark advertising. They do a lot of stuff for Beam and the distillery industry and as a whole. So they were terrific. Came up with the name Goodwood because we were known for our barrel aged beers, and we were off to the races. Yeah,
excellent. What a great story. Now talk about your brewery, Goodwood, how it expanded from really just kind of a beer distribution to now having a lot of, I guess you got several tap rooms and restaurants.
We do, yeah. So we were just a production brewery with a small tap room for years, and it was just a tasting room, and we would serve, little munchies. And then in 2019, we added food service to this facility. It did really well. And we opened our first restaurant in Frankfort, Kentucky, which happens to be the state capital. So that opened in the summer of 2019, right before COVID hit. So the timing was brutal for us. We'd been open about 8 months, and then we were shut down.
Yeah. And let's talk about that. I mean, I think for many businesses, there's lots of business owners who will connect with your story and kind of the excess of government. And I think back to lots of cities and communities where, we just heard these stories of cities coming in very heavy-handed. Sometimes it was the state, very heavy-handed, came in, shut down businesses. I remember even up in Anchorage, Alaska, talking to some folks, and, all the businesses, all the restaurants were shut down except the ones that had open air, outdoor dining. And it just so happened that the mayor at the time owned the facilities that had the open air dining in them. So, I mean, this was a very, very difficult time, I think, for lots of different businesses, but especially for restaurants and breweries. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. The rules, it was 2 weeks to flatten the curve was what they sold it on and shut us all down. And then ended up being for the better part of a year. Our state in particular, our governor was one of the governors that really enjoyed the lockdowns. Meanwhile, Indiana is open. Tennessee is open. So as you mentioned, we're right on the Ohio River. So we would watch, a line of traffic go over to southern Indiana to dine and enjoy themselves. Meanwhile, we were closed.
Sure.
So I took over a restaurant in Lexington that went bankrupt, and we'd stand in our restaurant, and it overlooks a shopping mall and is adjacent to a Target. So we can't have patrons in our restaurant yet there are literally thousands of people in the shopping mall and in Target. So the rules made no sense at all. Then when they did start to release and allow dining again, the rules were onerous. We had to put tents outside, so you could sit inside a tent outside, but you couldn't sit inside a restaurant, which made no sense at all. And then when they did allow patrons back into restaurants, you had to have the magic glass partition, as if that's going to stop a disease that's transferred as an aerosol, basically. So if those were so effective, then you'd be able to smoke in a booth, in theory, and the people in the booth next to you wouldn't be able to be affected by it. So the rules made no sense. You could sit at a table at a bar, but you couldn't sit at a bar. I mean, the rules were asinine, and it was one rule after another. And a lot of the PPE that they required everyone to wear later was proven to be useless as well. And a lot of us felt that it was useless at the time, but if you voiced your opinion, then you were silenced on social media,
sure,
or whatever your venue or avenue was to express it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It was a great. It was a great silencing of debate in America, for sure, during that time. And here you are, and I'm trying to put myself in your position. I mean, you've been open, you said 8 months, right? When all of this hit, and they shut you down. And so you have to either go with these ridiculous rules that you know are ridiculous, right? To go build outdoor dining and things like that in order to open, or you continue to bleed cash because you have all this capital that you've invested, but you're not getting any revenue off of it. I mean, is that essentially where you found yourself?
100%. We lost 97% of our revenue stream, and had to lay off 70 people. The government, so our state, by constitution, our state constitution, the governor does not have executive order authority. So the House and Senate granted him that executive order authority in January of 2020. Because he was so onerous, they rescinded his executive order authority in January of 2021. And that's when he didn't like that. So he sued. And in Franklin County, unfortunately, there's a judge that gives very favorable rulings to his party. So granted him executive order authority in perpetuity. So basically, they said, you're king. So I was on an email thread with about 100 restaurants, and we decided that we would pursue a lawsuit. Pacific Legal Foundation had contacted us. They're a wonderful libertarian, pro-Constitution law firm. So they took our case, and I sent an email to everybody, said you have to sign over, the right for them to argue on our behalf by Saturday. I gave everybody a week, and there were a grand total of 3 of us that were willing to do so because they feared repercussions,
sure,
and rightfully so. So there were 3 of us that sued. We sued in Scott County, the adjacent county to Franklin County, and we won. And then the governor appealed the lawsuit. We went to the state Supreme Court, and our attorney general at the time was a gentleman named Daniel Cameron, great guy. Daniel joined our lawsuit. He had a similar suit in another county, and we went to the state Supreme Court, and we won.
Yeah. It's staggering that the governor would, number one, the General Assembly gave him the authority, kind of emergency designation, and then he seems to have abused that. I mean, just wanted to keep it going. After a year, they rescinded it sounds like, and then he continued to want to do this. I mean, I don't know how anyone who lives in America and knowing our beginnings, the power and authority we'd never wanted invested in a king, to think that was okay. I can't imagine. What was the governor's reasoning for this?
It's strictly power. Our case was to be heard June 11th. So the governor decided that all restrictions would be lifted June 10th. And therefore our case should be thrown out because he simply didn't want to lose his executive order authority. But we said, no, thank you. We're going to have the case. And I'm glad we did. Now, conversely, all of my businesses have been audited going back 6 years, and I've been audited personally. So
since this happened?
Yes. Yeah. And in my, almost 30 years of business previously, I had never had an audit.
So by the state?
Yes.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That is that's amazing. I won't give you legal advice, but I imagine you probably have talked to a few lawyers about that. That just seems incredible and vindictive, right, of a governor. And to him, it didn't seem about doing the right thing to stop the spread, which is what happened during COVID. Some people got hung up on the power of it, and it wasn't about stopping COVID. It became about control and the use of power over individuals. And in this case, it seemed like the governor wanted that authority, those emergency powers at all costs. That became more important to him, it sounds like, than his ability to control or stop COVID.
Yeah, I would concur 100%. And, since then, our restaurant is in the heart of downtown Frankfurt, and all the politicians come there frequently, and I've gotten to know folks on both sides of the aisle, great people, and I'll get feedback through the grapevine that the governor still says very disparaging things about me and my business, which is really silly, because it wasn't about, never in my life did I envision suing the governor of my state. I mean, that's the last thing I want to do. I just want to run a business and leave me alone. And particularly my industry, which is so heavily regulated, so heavily taxed. I want government to kind of let me be and let me run my business. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's because you challenged the king, right? You stood up to the king, and the king doesn't like to be called out on these sorts of things. Did you find, well, let me go back a little bit too. So there were only 3 of you, I'll just say it, who had the courage to say, I'm going to take a stand here. And first of all, I commend you and the other 2 who chose to do that with you. That's how our liberty is saved for all Americans, right? Is because of people like you who choose to stand up. Most people in a situation like that, they don't stand up, and they don't want to take the slings and arrows that they're going to get, thrown at them. And so, first of all, I mean, the other 2 people who did this with you, I mean, do people come in and tell you that? Do they come in and say thank you for taking the stand that you took?
I have a lot of people that do to this day. I still do, and folks in Frankfurt, interestingly, still greatly appreciate what I did, or at least those that are in the opposing party to our governor. But it's always the keyboard cowboys, I call them, the folks that are real brave behind their computer. They love to vilify me for in their opinion, suing. Basically, they accuse me of suing a Democrat or trying to do something to disparage the governor, and that was not the case at all. I simply wanted to follow the state constitution and an open business.
Yeah, I assume you would have sued a Republican governor if a Republican governor had done the same thing to you. It's affecting your business. It doesn't hurt you any less because the governor happened to be Republican, right?
100%. 100%. In fact, I'll be one of I'm probably more critical of Republicans because I'm a very fiscally conservative guy. And when I see them abusing power or being corrupt and participating in the pay to play and other kind of the swampy type things that happen, I tend to be more critical of Republicans because I frankly have a higher standard. Although over time I've probably become more libertarian than anything.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now you talked about this. Was it a county judge who initially upheld the governor's order?
Yes.
Yeah. Tell me about that decision. I mean, that seems kind of an interesting decision. I'd love to hear maybe some of the details or some of the reasons why he felt the governor had the authority or power to do that.
Well, and I'm not that involved or knowledgeable about the court system in Kentucky or how all that works. But It's my understanding that this particular judge is sort of a rubber stamp. Anything that this particular governor wants, that he does. And he was Bashir was the attorney general before he was governor, and we had a Republican governor at the time, and he was filing suits left and right against the former governor to try to prevent him from governing. And then once he was governor, anytime something was, because they have veto power, and they have super majorities in the House and Senate, so they can veto the governor. And when he loses by veto, then he simply sues in Franklin County and gets it rubber stamped.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, so this case, did it ultimately go to the state Supreme Court, or where did you get your victory here?
Yes. So we sued in the adjacent county, where we knew we'd get a more fair trial, and that judge ruled in our favor. And then it was appealed by the governor up to the state Supreme Court, and they accelerated it because it was COVID related and pressing. So that's why it went. Our first hearing was, I think our suit was probably February when we won in Scott County, and then they accelerated it up to the state Supreme Court pretty quickly.
And a governor so bent on that power and maintaining that emergency power, where essentially you can do whatever and you don't have to be bothered by this silly little legislature that's out there, or the people. You just can write and sign a document, and that's the power and authority that our founders never intended for governors or presidents to have. But this governor took it all the way to the state Supreme Court to try and keep that power that was granted to him by the legislature, didn't want to give it back. It's like the emergency was never going to end until the governor decided that it ended. That's just stunning to me.
Yes, very much so. And, fortunately, Rand Paul, who in my opinion is a great or the U.S. Senator from Kentucky. He sent a nice note after our victory, and I think it certainly was in our camp as well. He's very, very much in favor of keeping constraints on government, both at the state and federal level. Yeah.
Well, hopefully Senator Rand Paul comes to your establishment once in a while. I hope he does. He should.
It is funny. We get a lot of support from folks that support us politically, and but at the end of the day, I want everybody coming to Goodwood. I want folks of all events, and let's have a conversation and a beer and discuss them, and try to change each other's minds.
Yeah. Why was it important for you to not just kind of drop the lawsuit, even after the governor said he was going to lift all the restrictions? You said on the 10th he lifted them because the court was the 11th.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important as you mentioned earlier. My grandfather died in World War II defending this country, and he didn't die so we could lose all of our rights internally. So I think it's incumbent on all citizens to do the right thing, even though I'm sure it cost me from a revenue standpoint, and certainly there are some folks I'm sure that still hate me to this day because I sued the governor, but. That's okay. If it's the right thing to do, then by all means, I think you have to stand up and do it.
Yeah, you do, and that's how our freedoms are preserved. And I'll talk about that in a second. But how's business today? Are you recovered and doing well business wise?
Yeah, it's hit or miss. The post-COVID world is a little different. A lot of the bigger cities that we were in, so we took over several other locations that had gone bankrupt as well. We took a place in downtown Indianapolis, Columbus, and even our original tap room in Louisville. You just don't see folks returning to downtown. The urban model is struggling right now because you have a lot of crime and homelessness, and then you're also dealing with a lot of remote work. So the population density of downtown for lunches, for happy hours, for dinners is much less. So we become more dependent on tourism and events than just daily foot traffic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, best of luck to you with obviously with your business. But I would say, to folks, and I'll say this at the end, but I want to thank you personally for this. By standing up, by being one of 3 business owners who stood up and were counted in this when it mattered most, you saved the freedom and liberty of everybody, even people who to this day criticize you maybe for the decision to do that. You saved their liberty and you saved their freedom too from a rogue governor who believes he's king and uses emergency powers to just rule over the citizens of the United States. It's not what our founders intended, but because you did that, and these other 2 business owners, because you did that, you did it for everybody, and everybody is a little more free and has a little more liberty because of that. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Ted, thanks for joining us. Listen, for a guy who started out as a bootlegger, you didn't do too bad. You know what I mean?
That's right. I guess it was in my blood.
Yeah, you turned out to be a pretty respectable fella for all of that. So that's great. I love it. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. Well, listen, Ted is a great example of what we try to highlight on this show, which is just average, everyday Americans who stand up and say, you know what, I'm just not going to take it. And we never saw more abuse, quite frankly, in my lifetime than we saw during COVID. And we saw that from many governors and from mayors and other elected officials who really saw it. Some of them were well-intentioned and wanted to, stop the spread of COVID, but others saw it as an opportunity for them to consolidate power and to do things that our Constitution would frankly never allow for. And we saw that. I live in Colorado, and when that happened and the restrictions that the governor of Colorado imposed, I went to Nebraska. I moved to a property I own in Nebraska, and I stayed there. And you know what? I could freely go and walk about and do my business. And Nebraska and Colorado, at the end of the day, had the same amount of incidents of COVID. It was literally the same. They both stopped it equally as well. So what we saw through COVID and some of the abuses by government to kind of infringe upon the rights of people, it's only because of people like Ted who stood up that we even have the liberty today to stand up against those kinds of restrictions from our leaders. So thanks to Ted, and thank you for joining us and for listening and watching our show. And again, liberty and freedom, they're easily taken for granted. You have to be like Ted. You have to go out. You have to defend freedom. You have to stand up and defend liberty. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.